Welcome to Saturday's Warrior, the channel where we talk all things BYU and Big 12. I'm Trevor, and with me, as usual, is Adam. And tonight, it's Tuesday night, it's election night, and tonight we are going to be discussing the battle that is going to really shape the future of our nation. We've got blue versus red. Of course, I'm talking about the Cold War. No, I mean the Holy War. But no election coverage here tonight. We are strictly focused on the Holy War this week. We are also going to take a look at the college football playoffs. The first ones have come out for this season. We're going to take a look at those and get into that and get our reaction to those. But before we do, we ask that if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. Give the video a like. It really helps us as we continue to grow and look to reach more and more Cougar fans out there. So, Adam, let me know. The new rankings were just dropped a little while ago. What are your initial reactions? And I'll pull them up here as you talk.
Yeah, well, not too new for us. I mean, more of the same. And I've really got two main thoughts on our number 9 ranking. Number one, it is a disrespect by the committee. I don't think there's any other way to put it. The reason for putting some of the teams ahead of us, I don't think are justified. And I thought they needed to get us to at least an 8 seed to show some respect. And I know it's not that different between an 8 and a 9 seed, but it can make a difference, especially if you're a one-loss team. And so there really was I thought a great amount of disrespect given our strength of record, given who we've beaten this season. So that was really disappointing. On the other hand, it doesn't matter. When we control our destiny, we have played ourselves into a position where we control the narrative, we control our destiny, and so whatever the committee says doesn't really matter, because we get an auto bid into the playoff and they don't vote on who wins those games. So at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. I would like to see us ranked a little higher, but just win, baby.
Yeah, I mean, that is the good news, is that BYU controls its own destiny. But the bad news is that if one loss comes at all, I feel like at this point the committee's kind of shown their hand that the Big 12 is getting one bid and one bid only.
Yeah.
And it's just, so there's really no slip up. I mean, especially now that, Iowa State lost, K-State had the embarrassing loss to Houston. There's, fewer and fewer opportunities to have a good loss, which apparently counts for a lot in the eyes of the voters and the committee.
Yeah.
Is those quality losses really, really help boost your score. And sometimes it seems more so than a quality win. And so,
I think it's important to note that if we win out in the regular season, I still see us getting an at-large bid. I do, despite the disrespect that was shown tonight, just because of what's going to happen over the next 4 weeks. It's going to be crazy, and it's going to be near impossible for BYU to go undefeated. It's going to be near impossible for anybody to go undefeated. That's what the last 2 weeks of college football shows you. It's just insanity, and that's what makes college football so fun. And so, if BYU does happen to win out and they go 12-0 and they lose in the Big 12 championship game, there I do see an at-large bid possible for BYU. But that is the only scenario. That is the only scenario. It is that, or it is win the Big 12 title game. Those are your only two paths: undefeated regular season, or win the Big 12 title game. Those are the only two ways BYU is getting in. There's no way they would let a 2-loss BYU team into the playoffs.
So you think I'm not so sure. If they go to the conference championship, let's say they're undefeated, they go and they lose to, like, let's say Colorado or K-State or something.
Mm-hmm.
You would think so. I think they've done enough. And I think that would be a quote unquote quality loss enough. But I'm just not seeing it. It looks like they're hellbent on getting 4 Big Ten and SEC schools each in there. And so for me, which just doesn't make sense, because for me, like, I understand, a couple at large, from a conference, but when you're getting 4, like, that is a quarter of your conference. That's why you have the regular season to play, when there's only 12 spots. And obviously March Madness, there's a million spots. You get in teams and you can play basketball games, a lot more consecutively than you can football, so it just makes more sense. But on this small of a scale, I just don't understand. Most of these teams have played each other and will have played each other, especially when you look at the conference championship. So I just think that mindset, and it's funny because we finally got something that we all always wanted, was this playoff. And now that we get it, we realize, oh, it's still, their thumb is on the scale as much as always. And
Well, yeah, and it always will be. I mean, it's always going to be politics in college football, unfortunately, until you expand to a 2014 playoff. Is that going to be enough? Is that just going to be, 8 SEC and 8 Big Ten schools? So there will always be those politics in there. And I've said this before: Big 12 and ACC need to go out and win. They need to win. SEC has won 8 out of the last 11 national titles, 8 out of the last 12. I mean, so you got to win when you get your chances, and this has more chance than we've ever had before for G5 and for ACC and for Big 12. And so obviously your odds are lower when you have fewer teams in there, but you got to win. When the chips are down, you got to win, because the committee didn't vote Alabama to win the semifinal and final, 5 out of 7 years or whatever their run was. They won that on the field. And as much as I can't stand watching Alabama win another title, that's still what's getting them this bias and this respect is the winning, and the money and the behind the scenes politics. The only way to influence that is to win on the field.
I mean, it's what got him into the playoff last year. It wasn't necessarily on the field play.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it is unfortunate, because now too, what they've done is with the playoff is, like you said, the more teams you have with your conference, the better odds you're going to have that someone goes. Even with 2 of those 4 teams playing each other in the first round, like Bama and Texas, the odds are still infinitely greater than it is having a single team in there. But it will be a playoff, and at the end of the day, they'll be able to make that argument, like you said, oh, just play it. Now, when you had just like the BCS or something, you could always say, oh, well, we didn't really know because these teams never played, or we didn't get to see it. Now they've removed all that, and even though they're still stacking the deck, they can say it was a playoff, and so that's going to be coverage for them. But I want to go through and look at some of these. We don't have to hash out everybody. Oregon makes sense, although we look at Oregon, they had a very close call against Idaho. And then a close call against Boise State, which is fair, a good team, but those were close calls. But Oregon is not getting dinged for that. Then you look at Miami, they had 2 very controversial wins against 2 very middling teams in Virginia Tech and Cal back to back. But when BYU goes down the wire and makes a very methodical drive in short time to have a comeback victory over Oklahoma State, which, even though they're down this year and very down, they're still a talented team, and BYU's back was against the wall. They still had to go do it. And there were no controversial calls on that. But yeah, people were saying, oh, BYU had to have this last second drive. That's what good teams do, is they go out and find a way to win. You're not always going to have a blowout. Even championship Alabama teams did not always have easy victories in every game. And so I just look at that. The double standard is just baffling to me, because BYU's played tougher teams. They've had a better schedule, and then Miami gets bailed out. And the Virginia Tech call, whatever way you come down on it, it wasn't clear cut. That wasn't like Miami just clearly going out and winning that game. And then the Cal, there's that huge that targeting call that wasn't called, that would have absolutely changed the outcome of that game. And so, okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, no, so there's a lot of that. And I think the most disappointing part of this playoff poll was that you would think the committee would want to put their stamp on it, that they're not just cowing to the AP poll.
Mm-hmm.
But the same illogic that's played into the AP poll, which is, oh, well, Miami was ranked high in the preseason, so they're going to stay high. I get that. That's how the AP poll is always going to be. It's based on last year's production. I thought the committee would want to, and they've done this in years past, they wanted to come out and make a statement to say, we're not the AP poll.
Right.
We think for ourselves. We look at the body of work this year, and we rank these based on this year. And they didn't do it. They just bowed down to what the AP poll had, and really made very, very few adjustments based on that. A couple things here and there, But to me, that was the most disappointing. Is I get that there's politics behind the scene. I get that the SEC and the Big Ten are going to be pushed, but there was some pride in that committee in the past to say, "Hey, we don't have to do what the AP poll does. We're our own unit. We look at we look at this season. I don't care what happened last season. We look at this season." And they certainly didn't do it. They just rolled off what the AP poll had and then tried to defend it. It was disappointing.
I think they figured after they were exposed last year with Florida State, I think they figured, why bother anymore? It's just, yep, that's right. So I want to go through some of this because talking about other teams that BYU is being compared against. So, and here, let me zoom in on this. This is from Cody Kellner. He says record versus opponents with a winning record: BYU 3-0, Indiana 2-0. Record versus bowl eligible opponents: BYU 2-0, Indiana 0-0. So have not played any bowl eligible opponents, and yet they're 9-0 and they're getting rewarded for it. Record versus current CFP top 25: BYU 2-0, Indiana 0-0. So, and then I won't pull up all the graphics here, but Steven here, he does some great analysis that I like looking at here on Twitter. But he says BYU has more wins against CFP top 20 teams than the 4 teams ranked above them combined, as well as fewer, I'm going to change it grammatically, but fewer losses to make it make sense. And so it's just, when you talk about the full body of work, and then Casey Lundquist says, did the committee just copy and paste the AP poll?
Yes, they did. Yes, they did. It's not going to make sense. It's not. There's too much politics behind the scenes for this ever to make sense. And you're going to get the same gripe from almost every SEC school because you've got 2 Big Ten schools now ranked 1 and 2, and they're going to say the same thing about Georgia and Ohio State and compare. And there's too much politics behind the scenes, and a committee sitting there nitpicking this, offensive efficiency number and that data point, whatever their justification is. I mean, you could stand up there and you could justify 15 different ways to rank these teams and still sit up there and be like, well, I mean, that's what makes college football fun. Is you sit around and you have these discussions like, oh no, so and so is better than so and so. You could argue that all day. That's sports. But at the end of the day, to just rank it the way they did it, the AP poll goes in a way that is really tough to defend. I mean, that's just, I don't know. That's classic college football politics.
Wild stuff. Last tweet here that I want to look at was Johnny Linehan says the SEC is brutal right now, in quotes, and he says Arkansas lost to the current worst team in the Big 12, Oklahoma State, but beat Tennessee. The SEC is an absolute, just imagine I'm saying this in a New Zealand accent. The SEC is an absolute juggernaut and no one can touch them. And then he says, finally, there's parity in college football, but we are still ranking teams based on their history. And then he says, all right, I'm going to go watch election results to calm down.
So we will, we'll do that again until we start winning. We meaning the field. Beat the SEC in the playoff. And I think they will this year. I do. I think the Big Ten is better than the SEC. And I think BYU has a shot against some of those SEC teams. And so I think there is an opportunity here to lay to rest this SEC dominant narrative. But boy, those games are going to be so important.
Yeah, absolutely. So just looking at this again, I've tried to ask myself, okay, how am I going to root? Obviously, you want to see Miami lose anywhere along the way, which does not seem like there's going to be many opportunities for that. Not a great strength of schedule, but yet, a very impressive undefeated record so far. But no, there's a couple of these though, and I've come to the mind because I'm thinking there's not very many games left. You have Oregon and Georgia up at the top, and I was thinking, I actually think I'm rooting for them to win out because there's no way they're going to both pick up a couple more losses. And then, because if you do, then it's just the parity. Oh, well, it's even across the top. Because the Big Ten has 5 teams with 2 losses and SEC has 5 teams with 2 losses. They're still both getting 4 teams in, it feels like.
Yeah.
You really need teams to start picking up those third losses. And so I almost think it's better if you have 1 or 2 teams that have 0 or 1 loss at the top of those 2 conferences, and then a bunch of other teams in the conference. Everyone else has 3 or more losses, because then it's harder and harder to argue those teams in over maybe Iowa State. Well, let's say with 1 loss. Let's say they win out beat BYU in the conference championship, and BYU has the one loss to Iowa State. Iowa State has one. Okay, they had a bad night, whatever. Then it's harder and harder to keep those teams out when everyone else in your conference has, a few losses. So that's what I'm rooting for. I'm now rooting for a couple guys to really set themselves apart from the rest of their conferences in the Big Ten and SEC, and everyone else to kind of fall behind and be, the rest. And I think that is the best chance for the Big 12
Agreed.
or anybody else to pick up.
Agreed. You got to get into the 3-loss SEC teams and 3-loss Big Ten teams for the argument to hold for a big. Unfortunately, I mean, but that's what it's going to take. So I agree. If you can get 1 or 2 teams dominant in those conferences and everybody else beat each other up, then I think you get a better opportunity for at-large bids for Big 12 and ACC.
So I don't like saying this, but I guess I'm rooting for Oregon and Georgia to win out, because let's say Georgia loses to Ole Miss if they play. If they do that, then Ole Miss is hanging around in the in the teens somewhere, and then they're just gonna we have a win over Georgia. Boom. Now if Alabama loses again, Ole Miss is in, or LSU slips in. You need real someone to really separate themselves. So even though I'm not convinced by Georgia, because they have they haven't looked nearly as dominant as they have in the past this season. And then last thing I was just noticing in this is, and it's funny because I really saw this coming, is that I would not be surprised. I think one reason why I don't think BYU is necessarily, I know they're not going to get one of the top 2 seeds, but with Boise State, even if they have a better overall body of work and, the way they played Oregon and if they win out everything else, I think, they'll definitely still come in as the bottom seed, which would be typical, because then the Big 12, even if Boise State wins, then you've got the Big 12 versus the G5, and then they're eliminating each other, because what they don't want is for the Big 12 and the ACC and the G5 to all 3 have different paths over to the semifinals. Like, they're going to stick them on the same paths. And I think that's almost inevitable, just to continue to, keep that as many options open for the big guys is what it feels like. But okay, so it doesn't look like there's lots of room for chaos in this group up at the top. Granted, it's college football, so anything could happen any week. But do you expect to see? Because one thing I remember when the college football committee first started, they said, "Hey, we're going to throw it away. We're going to start from scratch each week. Just because somebody's here, doesn't mean they're there." Like, it can look completely different. That's not really what we've seen in the past. How much moving around do you expect to see out of this group from week to week throughout the rest of the season?
I foresee a lot of movement week to week, because you're going to get losses. This season has been great for upsets, and now we're in November. And so I could see Oregon winning out. I could see Ohio State winning out. I could see Georgia winning out. But after that, I know Miami doesn't have a great schedule. I could see them dropping a game. From teams 4 to 12, you're going to see some losses. And I think you're going to see a lot of losses. So I think you're going to see a lot of movement there, not even based on the committee coming out and saying, "Oh, well, so-and-so didn't look as good." You'll see a little bit of that, right? Somebody has a close win, right? BYU squeaks one out over Kansas and what looks like a game they should have dominated, but Kansas is a strong team, so BYU drops in the rankings. You'll see a little bit of that, but really, I think there is a lot of football left to be played, and this list is not what we're going to see 5-6 weeks from now.
Well, let's hope not, in a good way for BYU. There's theoretically room for them to move up. Like, I think Indiana is a pretender, but that's the problem, is they have Ohio State on their schedule, but they pick up one loss, and then they can say, "Oh, well, we lost to the the number 2 team," or what, I guess 5 seed. Or no, they are 2 seed. So and they're, "Oh, that's our one loss." Yeah, but it's the only team you played, and so that's the other thing. Not only do we want some of these teams to lose, although I'd rather Ohio State lose always. I grew up in Michigan. I hate them more than I hate Utah. So anyway, you want to see them lose bad. The worst case scenario is you see, 2 of these teams duke it out into a really close game, and then there's no real clear separation there from it. So anyway, speaking of teams I hate, let's transition a little away from this. We'll have plenty of time to hash this out from week to week and transition back to which war was it again, Adam?
The Apple Cup, is that the Gulf War?
Man, so we're looking at this, talking about basically being disrespected and having bulletin board fodder, whatever, for BYU to use, looking at how the committee ranked them. I don't know if they're going to use this at all, but from Jalen Glover, who's one of the backup running backs at Utah, if you haven't seen it yet, he made some comments about BYU. Some people are like, oh, BYU so soft, whatever, get over it. And I don't know many people that are like offended by it. I think people are just like, yeah, this is kind of what we'd expect from Utah. And then when people whined about Max Hall calling him classless and saying that he hates Utah, well, I mean, he's not wrong, but also like that's just part of it. So I'm not necessarily offended by it. I just think it's funny, especially because he said a couple things. He won
He did.
after dropping the F-bomb towards BYU, which is to be expected. He says. He refers to the Holy War as the Cold War, and then he says Utah has a streak to continue, and that part I actually agree with.
Yeah, he's not well versed in his recent history of the Holy War, and my biggest thing on this is if you're going to talk, you need more than like 7 carries this year to be able to say something. I mean, you got to have some potential to influence the game than warming the bench, for Mekhi Bernard when he needs to take a rest. It just, I don't know. If you're going to talk, you got to have a chance to back it up on the field, and this guy's not even going to see the field, let alone be able to back it up. So, not. I mean, unintelligent remarks, uninformed remarks by someone who is not going to influence the game, apparently, because he doesn't play.
And it's bad when the department's like PR department has to write up an apology for you and post it out there, because all kinds of things are said all the time, and they had to say, like, let's walk this back. Dude.
Well, and the schools are really bending over backwards to make sure this is a more civil rivalry this year. And you saw the video by the 2 school presidents talking about how to have a better rivalry, and I get it. I think it's good.
I was out there. I started watching. I was like, maybe I should have finished watching it. Maybe I'm the problem, because
it was good. Like, I get it. I get what we're trying to do, and it's needed. I mean, like I said, I grew up in Utah, and it was brutal. This time of year was brutal, and I was part of the problem. Like, I was the one talking smack and being a jerk, and then I got it dished back at me so bad when we'd lose, and I hated it. I hated the rivalry because of that, and it just grew into something it never should have been. And so when you grow and you have a healthy respect for your opponent and a healthy sports hatred, and we can play the rival, we can have fun with this. But man, I remember talking to my dad in the 80s. It just drove him nuts because BYU was so dominant, and Utah fans just started hating everything about BYU, because that was BYU's first dominant streak, was late 70s to into the 80s in the rivalry. And now all of a sudden Utah fans just cheered against BYU no matter what. And he's just like, I don't want to be that type of fan. I don't want my kids to be that type of fan. Sadly enough, I was that type of fan. But it's okay to have a healthy respect. And when it's a rivalry week, we want to crush them. But the rivalry can be better, because it is. I mean, it is publicized nationwide how bitter this is, and it's carried out on Twitter every year. And you've had so many incidents, whether it's the Max Hall comments or Stevenson punching a fan in the stands after the 96 win. There's so many instances like that where it's like, okay, let's just cool this off a little bit. Let's stay hot-headed in the football game, because that's fun to watch.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's definitely a fun way to be rival and trash talk and have fun with it. And I've seen a lot of that on Twitter, not as much with Utah fans, although now that they're not good, all of a sudden they're coming to the table and trying to have more playful banter. Although I've seen some things, I can't even remember what it was. I saw one thing. Oh, it was everyone's just saying, as Utah's at like the bottom of the conference, this is a trash conference after after some of the losses this last week. And I'm trying to decide, is Utah more annoying when they're good or when they're bad? Like their level of trash talk is still just it makes just less sense though. But yeah, it definitely is. It definitely it heats up into a point that it shouldn't. But speaking of that, Kalani Sitake, we know he was over there. He's friends with Kyle Whittingham. They're friends, and that he's just the kind of guy that always wants to keep things respectful. But this is a game. I I was pulling up the BYU game. I forgot that was going on. To have an eye on that because I want to transition to that in a second. But the committee has shown that BYU needs to win with style points. It's not enough to win. It's not enough to be respectful. Like that interception against Arizona at the end, the pick six, that was needed because we otherwise they turn it over. We're on like what was it, like the 3-yard line or whatever, and take a knee instead of punching it in. And the score looks different. And that game, people are gonna look at that score and think, oh, this game was different than what it really was, because it just wasn't all that competitive. So this is a game, speaking of the Holy War now, that BYU is the clear favorite, and Utah is going to come out with a lot of fire, I think, in the beginning, because this is like one of the few things they really have to play for at this point in the season. Like this could, even if they have a bad season, they can still be like, yeah, we still beat you. Like, and kind of undermine everything that BYU is doing. They would love nothing more. This is all they have. BYU's got to get out to a hot start, but then they have to just keep laying it on. And even if the game feels like it's getting out of hand at some point, you can't let up at all. You can't let this Utah team get back in, because rivalry games, things get weird. But Utah's not really built for a big comeback. But do you really want to chance that?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And BYU's mentality is in that 3 to 4 score range lead. They will change their game plan, which is now drain the clock, run the football. And it gets a lot of heat. And it comes from two sources. Number one, analytically, that is a safer, a good way to play to win a game. You're probably going to win by 14 instead of 35, but you're going to win the game. If you're draining the clock and you're only giving your opponent 4 more possessions, that gives you the best chance to win. But there's a momentum, there's an intangible here where the team starts to take their foot off the gas. Look at the Baylor game. Look at Arizona was doing the same thing. And Kalani's done this his whole career, because the other element to it is he is a respectful opponent. And he's not trying to come out and just smash somebody by 60 points. But the committee does look at that. And you're right, rivalry games are funky. And yes, if you give Utah an open door, even if you got a 24-point lead, who knows what can happen? These games are crazy. They're crazy. So yes, I would love to see BYU do that. I'm resigned to the fact that they never will. The only way BYU would blow out an opponent is either through their backups getting fired up enough that they continue to run 5 yards a pop on the run game when the defense knows they're going to run the ball, or their defense getting scoop and scores and pick sixes in the fourth quarter like they did against Arizona. That's the only time you're going to see a 40-point win out of BYU. And yeah, I hope it happens in this game for a number of different reasons. It's been a long time since, I know we got into victory formation in 2021, which was awesome. We hadn't done that since like 1996. So victory formation against Utah is the goal at some point. But man, a double-digit win, a 2-3 score win against Utah would be amazing. And at this point, based on what the committee did tonight, you kind of need that. You kind of got to have that mentality. But I don't see it coming out of BYU, especially in this game that's historically a one-score game.
Yeah. And rivalry games, anything can happen. The one thing I did see that I think BYU is amongst the top in teams that have in turnovers and causing turnovers, and Utah is near the bottom of teams turning it over through throwing interceptions, I think. BYU is number 3 in the nation in passes intercepted, with 11 players with at least 1 interception, intercepting 14 passes. Utah is 132nd nationally in interceptions thrown. Only East Carolina has thrown more. So,
yeah,
that's a great, matchup. I think our strengths align well with their weaknesses. Obviously, this is a seasoned veteran coach with a bye week to really plan and get things, scheme up some new things. We've seen that before this year with Oklahoma
Yeah.
State, and that was a game that required an amazing drive at the end to win. So I wouldn't expect to see some crazy things. However, you just see the mindset of where Utah is at right now, and how BYU has been all season, all business, really focused. This does seem like the exact kind of game that BYU would lose in the past, but right now, this feels like a team that can get past that. And they've shown us time and again, oh, we won in the afternoon, we've won on the East Coast, we've, time and again, they've won these things. We won a Big 12 game on the road. This feels like another one of those hurdles that this team is capable of overcoming. And so it's a rivalry game, so anything could happen. But it does feel like if any team were equipped to handle this situation, it is this version of BYU.
I totally agree. The mental strength of this team has been astounding, and that's what you need to win rivalry games. And so I do expect them to come out stronger. The only thing that worries me is the bye week, is the fact that Utah is going to implement as much of a new offense as they can, because whatever they've had in the past is not working. So what do you have to lose? Why not? Why not implement new formations, new styles? Right? You're not going to go too far to the comfort zone of your current offensive coordinator. And so you can kind of gauge where they're going to be based on that. But it's going to be a ton of new wrinkles. There's going to be trick plays. They're going to do anything they can to score because they haven't been scoring. They lost their wide receiver to injury this week. They can't decide on a quarterback. They're throwing picks left and right. Doesn't matter who's the quarterback. And so it's been a really bad offense. But that's the one thing that worries me is you've got a bye week to prepare. You got a head coach and a new offensive coordinator who are very seasoned. They know how to do this. And you don't know what you're going to see when you get out there as the BYU defense. So you can prep for one thing, you're going to see something completely different. And can you adapt to that? I would look for Utah to score on their first drive, maybe their first couple drives. It's going to be a question of whether BYU can respond to that, because I think whatever Utah comes out with in those first couple drives is going to be nothing like we've seen this season, because that's the obvious thing to do. You can't just keep doing the same thing. So they'll come out and I think they'll do well early. But if the BYU defense can respond and adapt to that and shut that down, then I think you're going to see BYU create some separation. If BYU can't generate a push on offense and really win when it's strength versus strength with the BYU offense and the Utah defense, then it's going to be a long night, and who knows what's going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's transition super quick so we can we got a bit to cover still, but basketball starting right now as we speak. Give me a quick summary. How you feeling about BYU men's hoops right now?
I am elated. I cannot wait to see what happens this season. The only thing left in the Kevin Young, question mark is, how is he going to coach? How can he handle in-game adjustments? How is he going to handle when his team runs into adversity over the full length of a season? He hasn't done this for a long, long time, and he's never done it at this stage, at this level. You're not getting 15,000 fans to a G League game. It just doesn't. He has never been the man with a spotlight like this, and that's the only question, because everything else he is crushing. I mean, I saw Xavier Staten signed, 4-star 7-footer from Nevada, number 23 overall prospect in the country. Just he is blowing it. He's knocking it out of the park on everything. And now we get to see how he coaches. And so I'm super excited. I expect ups and downs this season. I don't expect them to make a Final Four run this year. I don't expect them to make the Big 12 championship, but I do expect them to do better than what they were picked at in 9th in the Big 12. I see them 5th, 6th, somewhere around there. If you get above that, then you're seeing some real success, and look out, because he's going to continue to build on this. But if they struggle, you're going to lose some of those recruits, right? He's sold them on something, and he hasn't even won a game yet, and he's signing these dynamite recruits. So he's got to back it up with winning. But boy, who are we to question what he can do at this point? And now that he just continues to knock it out of the park.
Yeah, absolutely. As you were talking, Yegor Demine threw an alley-oop to Kenning catching. So
I love
I
that.
expect to see more of that, but for one season only. So yeah, you mentioned Xavier. What's his last name? Staten, thank you. And he's already said that he's recruiting AJ DeBonsa, and that he's been texting him, and he's already listening to get like 99 on the crystal ball and stuff. So, there's just more good to come. Talk about winning the bye week, though. We also got 2 huge recruits for the O line. The youngest Pay brother, as well as another recruit who flipped from Oregon, who has a name with a lot of vowels in it, and I won't attempt to say just yet, but at some point I will have it figured out. But yeah, as well as other sports, we had men and women's cross country winning the Big 12 championship, which is awesome, above Oklahoma State, who's like number 1 in the nation right now. So as well as women's soccer, what was it, 5-0 in the Big 12 tournament in the, I think, quarterfinals of the Big 12 women's soccer. And so, man, we just really have Oklahoma State's number this year, it feels like. So
yes, we do.
Let's hope that continues. Basketball, hopefully, as well, because they punked us last year when they shouldn't have. So, all right. So let's get over real quick to our picks. Not a lot to see here, at least not a lot to brag about. So let's get to this. So a lot of red, at least it's on both sides. So you and our good friend Jake Hatch, who was on last week, both had Arizona State. I had OSU. You guys both had that right. He had UCF over Arizona.
He had a good insight there. That surprised me, but the UCF won over Arizona in a big way. It's like they decided to right that ship in one game. That was impressive.
And the other 2 games, we already talked about this, but Iowa State and Kansas State losing, while it's bad for the conference, obviously it's great for BYU in terms of strengthening their odds of making the conference championship game, even with a loss. However, it makes the conference look bad. But what it should be more than anything is a wake-up call to BYU. You cannot take any great game for granted, and you have to come every night, because anything can happen. Weird things can happen. Weather can happen, whatever. And we saw some of all of that. So to me, I see that as a good thing. If they're able to, learn from that, from someone else's mistakes. What happened there? Am I going backwards? Okay. So now here's our total standings. You pulled ahead of me. We were tied last week. So
got to dig deep. Got to win in November.
Well, you can. So now we've got this. I was surprised. So we were actually basically in lockstep. So on our pick. So I'm just gonna roll through these. Why is it going backwards, man? There we go. All right. So you picked Cincy. What was the thought there?
Yeah, since he's building momentum, and West Virginia's faltering. I think they're going to lose their head coach at the end of this year, and I think it's just a feeling around the program. They're just going in opposite directions.
Yeah. Cincy's been pretty impressive what they've done, and it's at home, so I'm going with them.
Yeah.
We both picked Iowa State to bounce back, even though Kansas has been frisky as of late.
I was so tempted to pick Kansas, and honestly, I think if Iowa State had won last week, I would have picked Kansas. But that was a wake-up call. I think Iowa State is going to come out disciplined. And honestly, for our sake, I hope Iowa State wins, because we talked about this a little bit last week. I don't want Kansas coming in to our house next week with the chance of being bowl eligible, even if it's unlikely. But if they beat Iowa State and they beat BYU, they can get bowl eligible. The rest of their schedule is not that difficult. Certainly not as difficult as Iowa State and BYU. And so they're going to come in with a head full of steam. That is a talented team that is lost by 1 score every week, it seems. And so if Iowa State can win that, they're no longer bowl eligible, and we get the dejected Kansas Jayhawks instead of the motivated Kansas Jayhawks. So I'm really hoping Iowa State, for our sake, wins that game this week.
So what you're trying to say is that I kind of had a point all those weeks I kept picking Kansas?
I didn't want to say that, but I'm saying it.
Okay. So we both have Colorado, even though Texas Tech has, well, I mean, they've been all over the place. So
they have, and I watched the game against Iowa State, and I felt like Iowa State gave that away more than Texas Tech won it. Morton is supposed to be the next great thing at quarterback in the Big 12, and I really wasn't impressed. This is his first full year. He's got time to grow, but he was missing some big throws in there, and I feel like Colorado's got their eye on the prize now, and I think that's going to weigh more in this game.
Yeah, I just think the high-end talent, I still am on the fence. I'm still not really bought into what Coach Prime is doing with Colorado, but they do have some high-end talent. And in a lot of these games when they're close, that can be the difference maker. So I do think Colorado wins that, although I'll be rooting for Texas Tech because I'm not sure I want to see Colorado in the conference championship game, although that would certainly get some good ratings, though.
Yes, it
Uh,
would.
so here, I actually was thinking UCF, but I was on the fence with this one. So I switched to Arizona State. It is at home for them. They've been very good, but what you saw with, I mean, and UCF has to go cross country. We always talk about that BYU going to the East Coast. This is
Yeah.
UCF coming to the West Coast, and so although they just switched time zones, so are they in Mountain now? Yeah, I think they're Mountain. They're now technically Mountain time, so it's only 2 time zones. But with daylight savings too, like your clocks are going to be all messed up. So I don't know. You obviously saw enough with UCF what they did to Arizona to think that they can come into Phoenix and do it again.
Yeah, it may be a one-game mirage based on what UCF was such a dominant performance against the team in Arizona, who I think is still talented. They're obviously falling apart at this point in the season, but I think that's still a good team. It was an impressive victory. But it was more what I was reading online about Arizona State, and maybe I'm just following more of the fans' mentality. But there was a bit of arrogance there in Arizona State after beating Oklahoma State, and this sort of chest thumping about how they've got a shot at the Big 12 title game and a clear path, and just the way they were talking about the remainder of their schedule, which includes BYU. It just felt like a lot of arrogance in a time when a team gets humbled. And so we'll see if that's really just, if I was just reading into the fandom and I'm overblowing UCF's win over Arizona, but you got to feel like UCF breathes a sigh of relief. They feel like they finally got it figured out, and now they're going to go on a tear. They're one of the more talented teams in the conference. So I don't know. I think this is going to be a good game. I got UCF in an upset, but it wouldn't surprise me at all to see Arizona State win this.
Yeah, like I said, that was kind of a toss-up for me because I wanted to believe that UCF's figured something out. And I've been kind of not fully bought into ASU all year because of the games that they have won have looked less and less impressive as the season's gone on. So
Yeah.
for the most part. So let's go on. We both have TCU here. I think Oklahoma State I picked them last week. I think they've just shown, even though they still have some of that talent, they're missing a lot of help at quarterback, like another team we might talk or have talked about. But I just, something's fundamentally wrong there. TCU is all over the place, but I think that's all over the place seems to be enough to win this one. And the one thing TCU can do is kind of put up points. And so I think that'll be advantageous when they're going up against a struggling OSU.
Yeah, for sure. OSU's in shambles.
So here's the kicker. Did you decide to pick Utah to lose this week and Utah or BYU to win? Or are you going to go with what you did last week? I guess.
I really got to explain my pick here because you you got to understand Utah's a sleeping giant and a strong team. No, I can't defend Utah enough to pick BYU, and this is the one uh, uh, illogical pick I would make, even if BYU was 4-4 and Utah was 8-0. I'm always going to pick the Cougars in this one, but I, I know everybody talks about a hard fought battle. I'm kind of in the same train of thought that you shared, where Utah, something's broken in that locker room, and that's tough to fix in mid-season. It really is. I mean, look at the Eagles last year in the last 7 weeks of the season, where they inexplicably just fell apart. I mean, that they had gone to the Super Bowl recently and just had the same team, and they just fell apart because the sports psychology element of football is one of the most intriguing parts to me, and that's what BYU seems to have figured out, which is why they keep defying all the experts, all the analytics, all the blah 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 that everybody keeps picking against the Cougars. Fine, they go out and win because they've got it figured out. Their mentality is so strong and their execution is so strong. It doesn't matter who they go against. Whereas Utah feels the exact opposite, right? Where Mekhi Bernard is like, oh well, something's broken, but I'm not going to tell you what it is, and and they just right. Something is fundamentally off with that team. And I just don't see them fixing that in time for an emotional Holy War game. I think they can come out and have a strong start, and things can look scary early. But I just see BYU as the stronger team mentally, and that's going to be enough in this game with the talent that BYU has shown. I'm really looking to their offense. BYU has taken huge strides in their offense every week, especially since LJ Martin has come back. If that continues, and you can put up points against a stout Utah defense, look out. I mean, the rest of the season looks super bright if that offense continues to improve every week like they have. It's been so impressive.
Um, yes, absolutely. And you just had me thinking. I was just uh, with your comment about the locker room there, bro, and how broken it is, and just the state of the Utah program. My dad, who's a Utah guy, he's been very supportive of BYU. You know, he'll even don a BYU hat sometimes if we go to a game. You know, he tries to support both, but Utah is in such state. He's said, you know, I might have to root for BYU this year because he's the one that wants to see both, not because he's switching. He's a Utah guy through and through, but he wants to see
Yeah.
both do well. And so for to ruin that for BYU, he thinks it would be better for, you know, the collective of the two schools that BYU goes on. I think that's how he looks at it. If I'm to understand it, I don't know, because I can't say I'd feel the same way if the roles were
He's in a
reversed.
rare spot to be able
I would
to
just
be able
keep
to
my
do
mouth
that.
shut and say, "Yeah, Dad," because he's so supportive. But I try not to, you know, go the other way. Like you said, the toxic environment, and I'm probably part of the problem. Um, so real quick, just our power rankings. I want to go through all this. I've got a little more consistency. You really mix things up, but man. A win and a loss here really swayed things for you. You're riding the wave of the moment. It looks like on yours. One thing that we both have very consistent. Well, besides Utah being at the basement of the conference, actually our bottom four are in lockstep.
Yeah.
Um, is that Baylor made it up to the top four for both of us?
Yeah, they are surging, and I think that's good for BYU. We had a close game, barely pulled that out with the last minute interception, so I think it looks good for BYU. But I like Baylor. I like that they're figuring this out. I'm happy for Dave Aranda. Their offense looks incredible. Their defense is pulling it out in clutch moments. So yeah, I like Baylor there. I have Houston up there. I have Kansas State low. Just because if you're going to lose to Houston, I'm sorry. It's going to be bad if you're going to lose to Houston. And so it's power rankings. It changes week to week. UCF has a big victory. But yeah, I really dinged Iowa State and Kansas State for their losses, in part because of who they lost to.
Yeah,
Those are games they shouldn't have lost. And the same thing could happen to BYU, right? We don't have a slate of one loss or undefeated teams that were playing the rest of the year. But I think BYU and Colorado are the clear 1 and 2 in my mind. But after that, it's tough to say. I'm impressed you kept Kansas State as high as you did after a loss to Houston.
yeah, I know. I thought about it as I was moving them up a spot after losing to Houston of all teams, but I just looked at it and I feel like these are the top four teams in my mind in the conference. And Baylor, you know, I feel like they still have to be held accountable for what they did earlier, but they've shown that they're a different team now. Kansas State and Colorado played a close game. Kansas State won the head-to-head. Now I have to take everything into record. You know, I went back and forth on whether to flip Colorado and Kansas State. But I do feel like those are the four top teams right now in the conference. Iowa State is TBD. We'll see. But after having 2 weeks in a row where they've struggled at home against lesser
Hmm.
competition and losing one of those and needing to pull out a last minute touchdown to win the other, like BYU needed that against Oklahoma State, but then we went out and took care of business on the road at UCF.
Correct.
Iowa State did the opposite at home. And so for me, I don't know. I need to see a little bit more, but I could see that. I don't know. They feel like they're now kind of right there in that cluster in the middle with a lot of other teams where you're not really sure what they are yet.
Yeah. Yep. I agree. The next couple weeks are going to be crucial for Iowa State. And to me, I don't know if it matters too much. They're going to lose to Kansas State the last week of the season in my mind. I have always felt like that. I thought Iowa State would lose at some point, and I always thought it would be to Kansas State. I was surprised it was to Tech, but I also thought Kansas State would win out. I really did. I thought they had a head full of steam. They would not stop. We would meet them in the championship game if we go because they were going to make it. And that Houston game was shocking, and that Houston game is becoming more and more scary the last week of the season for us.
Well, I asked Jake Hatch this last week. And by the way, if you have not seen that video yet, you can go check it out. I'll put a link to it. You can go watch that interview with Jake Hatch. He had some good insights into a lot of things, BYU as well as the Utah program where they're at right now. But out of all the teams that are kind of in contention, who would you least like to see BYU face, assuming BYU makes it in the conference championship?
So I've had Colorado and Kansas State as the two for a long time. Kansas State because of the revenge factor, and that's
Yeah.
always scary. We didn't just beat them; we destroyed them at home. and so they would have plenty of extra motivation. I don't know that we're going to see them in the championship game. So to me, it's Colorado with all of that talent. It would be exciting because they're a pass first team and we defend the pass so well. So it would be a really fun matchup to see, just the X's and O's on that. But I think they're
They can't
probably
protect
the
the quarterback
strongest.
either.
Huh?
Sorry. Oh, I said they can't protect their quarterback either, but sorry, I cut you off.
Yeah. No, I just think it'd be a fascinating matchup. But of all the teams I don't want to see, when I look at everybody else in the conference and who could possibly make it to that game, Colorado's the most dangerous in my mind.
All right. Awesome. I agree. They are. So do you have, real quick, score prediction for the Holy War?
I'm going to go 34-14 Cougars. We're going to do it. We're going to pull out a big victory. It's going to look close early on. Maybe midway through the second quarter, we start to separate. Strong second half. Retzlaff looks great. We're going to struggle running the ball against a really stout front seven, but I think Retzlaff is going to have his game and his moment in the Holy War, and we're going to come away with a 2-3 score victory.
I do feel that in my heart, but I was on the Utah Man podcast, who's the Utah channel for the College Huddle, and I'll also be posting. They came on our show. We'll be posting that later this week, so keep an eye out for that and talking a little bit about their perspective on Utah. And they are as down on the team as you might expect Utah fans to be. So I took it easy on them, but they had some good insights. But yeah, they kind of put me on the spot and they asked me, and I don't know why I hadn't thought ahead of time to prepare a prediction. And I said 27-17. I just feel like rivalry games, things can get weird. But when I look at these two teams, BYU, like you said, the final score should be more along the lines of what you're saying. And I hope it is. So I guess we'll see. But all right. Well, that is it. Again, if you haven't already, please like the video, subscribe to the channel. Again, I already mentioned we've got the Know Your Foe segment coming out later this week with Utah Man Podcast, as well as we will be live streaming after the Holy War. So if you're like me and no matter what happens, you're amped after games, you can't go to sleep yet, come join us, join the chat, give your thoughts, and have a good time. And hopefully we'll be celebrating. We can trash Utah some more and move on and and just have a good blue goggle time. So anyway, Adam, it's been real, but as always, go Cougs.
Go Cougs.